All right, let's jump right into a real legal head-scratcher. It's all about two big ideas that are constantly crashing into each other: your freedom to choose what happens to your own body, and the law's job to keep you safe. So, what happens when you actually consent to being harmed? Let's figure this out.
So, let's dive in with our first case. Picture this. Two students. They agree to a fist fight. One of them ends up with a broken nose. Now, they both agreed to it, so you think, hey, they both signed up for this, right? End of story. But for the law, oh no, it's just getting started.
Okay, now for something way more private. You've got a husband who brands his wife's initials onto her skin. And the key here, she enthusiastically asked for it. It's definitely an act that causes harm, but it's also happening between two consenting adults in private. And for our third situation, we're heading into the bedroom. A couple engages in some consensual rough sex, and it leaves some visible bruises. Both of them were completely on board, and nobody is complaining after the fact.
So you've got a fight, a branding, and an intimate act. They all involve harm, and they all involve consent. But, and this is the wild part, in the eyes of the law, one of these could land you in jail, while another is perfectly fine. Why? Well, that's the puzzle we're going to solve today. We're going to unpack the legal toolkit the courts use to figure this stuff out.
First things first, to solve this puzzle, we have to get our heads around the crime at the center of it all. It's called actual bodily harm, or, as you'll often hear it, ABH.
So, what exactly is it? Well, the legal definition we use comes from a case called Chan Phuc, and it's shockingly broad. It's basically any injury that is more than trivial. It doesn't have to be permanent or even serious. Think of it as the legal middle ground between, say, a simple push and a really severe wound.
And when I say broad, I mean really broad. I mean, look at this. Cutting off someone's ponytail? Yep, the court said that's ABH. Minor bruises or marks? That counts too. Even being knocked out for just a split second. And get this, it's not just physical. A diagnosed psychiatric illness that's caused by harassment or threats can also be ABH. The law is trying to protect your whole person, mind and body.
And this is why it's such a big deal. 5 years. That's the maximum sentence for ABH. We're not talking about a slap on the wrist here, which is exactly why this whole question of consent becomes so incredibly important.
All right, on to the next piece of our legal toolkit. We've talked about the harm. Now let's talk about the intention, what lawyers call mens rea. And this is where things get a little weird.
Okay, this is absolutely crucial. To be guilty of ABH, you don't actually have to intend to cause any harm. All you have to do is intend the initial act, the push, the punch, whatever. If that act results in an injury that's more than trivial, you're on the hook for it, whether you saw it coming or not. Now, a lot of critics really don't like this. They call it a constructive crime of half mens rea. What they're basically saying is that it's unfair because you're getting punished for an unlucky outcome, not for what you actually set out to do. Your legal blame is based on the result, not your original intent.
Okay, so we've got the crime, and we've got the weird rule about intent. Now we can finally get to the absolute heart of our puzzle, the defense of consent, and why it's not the magic get-out-of-jail-free card you might think it is.
And here's the big twist. The second an injury hits the level of ABH or worse, the law just flips the whole idea of consent on its head. Suddenly, consent is not a defense unless the activity you were doing falls into a special, legally approved category. For any real harm, consent becomes the exception, not the rule.
So what gets a pass? Well, the courts have laid out a few specific situations where they think consenting to harm is okay because it serves some kind of social good. We're talking about things like medical surgery, of course, properly conducted sports like boxing or rugby, tattooing and piercing, and even what the law calls rough but harmless horseplay.
And this is where things get really thorny. Why is a boxing match considered a public good, but other activities that involve consensual harm are not? This is the point where the law steps out of just applying rules and starts making judgments about public morality.
This quote really gets to the heart of it. It comes from a huge, landmark case called R.V. Brown, which was about a group of men engaging in consensual sadomasochism. The court, led by Lord Templeman, basically said, look, individual freedom has its limits. He argued the state has a duty to protect people, even from themselves, and that causing each other real harm for no good reason is just not something society should allow.
And this is where your brain might start to hurt a little, because just 2 years after that Brown case, the courts heard the Wilson case. That's our branding scenario. And the verdict was the complete opposite. Why? because the judges decided the branding was more like a tattoo, a form of private, personal decoration. The acts in Brown, on the other hand, they saw as violent and immoral. So you see what's happening? The law isn't just looking at consent, it's judging the activity itself.
But not everyone agreed. Not by a long shot. In a really powerful dissent in that same Brown case, Lord Mustill argued that the law has absolutely no business being in the bedrooms of consenting adults. For him, this was a matter of private morality, not something for the criminal courts to weigh in on. It just shows how deep this disagreement goes.
Now, the debate still rages on, but for now, Parliament has put its foot down. The Domestic Abuse Act of 2021 pretty much wrote the majority decision from Brown into statute, making it crystal clear that you cannot consent to serious harm for the purpose of sexual gratification. This was a direct response to the so-called rough sex defense being used in some really high-profile cases.
Okay, we've got all our puzzle pieces on the table. We know what ABH is, we know the rule about intent, and we know the tricky limits of consent. So let's go back to our 3 stories from the beginning and see how the law delivers its final verdict. First up, the bar fight. For the courts, this is a slam dunk. A fist fight isn't a properly conducted sport. It's a threat to public order, and the law says it has no redeeming social value. It doesn't matter that they agreed. Guilty of ABH.
Next, the couple's branding. Following the logic from that Wilson case we talked about, a court would almost certainly see this as a private matter of personal adornment. They'd say it's basically like getting a tattoo. So consent is a valid defense here, not guilty.
And finally, the bedroom incident. This is the one that really gets people talking. Based on the precedent from R.V. Brown and that new statute, even with full consent, the bruising was caused for sexual gratification. The law has decided that this activity has no social value, so consent is not a defense. Guilty of ABH.
So what this all comes down to is that the law is acting like a paternalistic guardian, deciding for us which activities are valuable enough to society to allow someone to consent to harm. It draws a line in the sand between your personal freedom and what it sees as public safety and morality. And that leaves us with one final very big question. Is that line in the right place?